Joining us this week on the Sunday Times Politics Weekly is Saftu General Secretary, Mr. Zwelinzima Vavi. Now, Mr. Vavi joins us in studio where we will be unpacking some of his views and sentiments around what is happening in South Africa's current political landscape, what his views are in a post-democratic South Africa, whether or not he believes that workers still enjoy the same level of support that they did from the ruling party, and just basically how he believes we can mitigate some of the challenges that are facing not only this country 30 years post-democracy, but also our ailing economy. Mr. Vavi, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you taking time out to be with us in studio. I'm going to start with the decline in trade union membership. What does this mean for workers' bargaining power?
Well, it means that the voice of the working class is weakened. It means that their power has declined. It means that their relevance is being challenged. And I hope that we'll have time to talk about what could have led to this unfolding tragedy. In terms of the numbers of workers who believe that trade unions are still relevant for themselves. But we've done very well, having started black trade unionism in 1918, battled along with the ICU in the 20s, and battled into the 1930s, 40s, and leading to the creation of the first bigger non-racial federation in 1955, the South African Congress of Trade Unions, and unfortunately then getting battered, totally forced to exile after the Sharpeville massacre by the brutal regime, and then coming out of age again in 1973 through the 1973 Durban strikes that spread all over the country, and to recreate again a new momentum towards the 1976, 1979 when the Vienna Commission made recommendations about recognition of black workers as workers, up to when the trade union movement worked very closely with the youth movement in the country to respond to a call that had been made by O.R. Tambo in exile, that South Africa must be ungovernable and that we must make apartheid unworkable. And the unions grew in the back of militant struggles, and leading to 1990, and when we began to see the release of the first prisoners, Harry Gwala, later Walter Sisulu, Mkwai, and Mutwaledi, and others, and then eventually the unbending of the ANC, PAC, and others, the release of Nelson Mandela. The unions were absolutely powerful at that moment, but they consolidated their power even more post 1994, such that by 2007, the unions were almost representing 40% of all workers in the economy. And after 2012, the unions lost their mojo, and their juju. It just disappeared, and for a myriad of reasons. And I can speak about those reasons, but I just wanted to show you that actually the Marikana massacre would have not happened if the union was still as relevant as it was in the early 90s, early 2020, post-1994, 80s and 70s. It was a statement of neglect It was the statement or the part of the workers who felt that unions were no longer representing their interests but that of management. It was an era when the gains workers have made through consolidation of their own trade unions was beginning to bite the trade unions themselves.
Yeah.
Because at that time, and unfortunately, the clever management in the mines in particular was beginning to outsource its responsibility to manage employment relationships between the mines and the worker through the union. So the shop stewards now were de facto HR managers. They were employing people and they were recommending who must be dismissed, in particular those that were the enemies of themselves, and were in that process getting corrupted. And so by 2012, workers on their own decided that now we can no longer rely on this historic union, the National Union of Mine Workers. And they led themselves, and unfortunately the massacre happened. Whilst that massacre was happening, there were other uprisings also making the same statement in the farms of the Western Cape, the Warrens areas, where farm workers were taking up a battle against a wage directly and indirectly imposed on them by the union, in that through the establishment of all of these institutions, such as the employment equity where unions have representation, such as the wage commissions, that was looking at how we set sectoral determination. The unions were represented in those bodies. And yet the average worker salary at that time in 2012 was around 67 rands and a whole day. And workers said, no, we want at least 114. On their own, they fought. No union involvement, showing total distrust on the union correctly, and then won their own battles. So from there, you have unfortunately a message being sent throughout the country that these guys are useless, and that we can fight our own battles. So I spoke about how management would have slowly provided the power the unions wanted, but in the process capturing them to be part of management, and then the rest is history. We have written a very detailed discussion paper analyzing what have gone wrong in the trade union movement between the 1973 strikes and to date, which was last year. And when you read that, it's a very, very heavy criticism of ourselves as a movement, that we've lost the plot and that there is a need to revive the trade union movement, but revive it based on the values, the ethos of the 1973 struggles of workers that represent the true values of the working class and black people, centered around Ubuntu. Ubuntu itself representing the best traditions of sacrifice and solidarity and all of those things that makes us to feel that if we were to practice these values, South Africa will be a better place.
Yeah, I think, definitely. You, in your reflections, I think you it's quite evident that in the absence of decisive leadership, the people shall govern themselves. And speaking to the unions not having as much power as they wielded in the past, and the decline in trade union membership, we're just trying to find out what is the reason behind the decline. Is there a trust deficit between workers and unions, and what has led to that outside of management's interference in that relationship? What has led to that decline or that trust deficit?
Is both internal and external issues. Let me start with the external issues. The external issues is that the capitalist system, inspired by the neoliberal ideology represented by Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan, who in the main centered around an ideology that says there should be no state, there should be no protection of anybody, including worker, environment, women, everything. Every member of society must stand on his or her own to battle in his own, her own, in her own corner to survive. And they call this free market. We call it free market fundamentalism. And when that happened, the capital started to restructure the working class. And let's face it, they have now succeeded to restructure them into the following categories. You've got workers who belong to the big firms, big workplaces, big numbers. And up to today, those workers are still enjoying the fruits of the sacrifices, the struggles of themselves and the previous generations. And it is those workers who enjoy most of what flows out of the Constitution of South Africa that promises every worker fair labor standards. They are able to use the Labor Relations Act, the Basic Conditions of Employment, the Occupational Health and Safety Act, the Employment Equity. They use all of the gains of the pre-1994 to defend their rights and to advance some of the gains that they would have inherited. And the South African labor regime is progressive. And it requires, unfortunately, the big, strong, powerful unions who can enforce it in the workplace. And so that's a category of workers that you have in South Africa. You have a second category of workers who are employed and who are outsourced, who are employed by small firms. They are typically not more than 10 in their workplaces, and who are in what we call the atypical forms of employment. And these are doing jobs that offers them no job security. They have no protections in the form of employment equity or anything that is in the Constitution or in the labor laws. They have no medical aids, no provident fund, no transport, housing, benefits of any kind. And it's easy to get rid of them. And they're becoming women and young. And that's a connection between workers young, not feeling any affection to the unions because they are in the front row, in the fire of this brutalization that is being offered to them by the system of capitalism. And so there has been a rise of what we call precarity, insecure, outsourced, labor brokered jobs in South Africa. And this informalization in the face of massive deindustrialization, because what have happened is that all of the previously secured, better paying, better benefits jobs are on the decline, not just in South Africa. It's a phenomenon everywhere else in the world.
Yes.
We have not been able to, as a trade union, to ensure that we develop new strategies to give these workers more vulnerable than any other one a voice. So, unfortunately, they constitute the majority now. Unions represent 4 million to 5 million out of 16 million. You can see that about more than 10 million of workers do not belong to any trade unions. The face of them is black young women. And then you have another category of workers who are kept in structural unemployment. 60% of them have never worked. And 8.4 million of them are not in any employment, not any education or training. 8.7 million.
Do we then still categorize them as workers if they've never been employed?
Yeah, workers. In terms of the ideology we believe in, anyone who stands in the queue to sell their labor for a living is a worker, belongs to the working class, and eventually will be politicized, and he will become a member of a class of the working class.
Okay.
Yeah, in a class divided society such as ours. So these are workers in our view, and they have no chance of being owners of production. No chance in a blue moon. They're finding it difficult to even get employment opportunity. How much more to be owner of any mine of big tracts of land. So they are working class, and that class is 12 million in our country total. The face of it being the young people, black people, the women, and the people in the rural areas. But also increasingly, there is no more a real difference between urban and rural poverty, because there have been such a massive track of migration between the rural side of South Africa into the urban side. So the face of that poverty now, unemployment, is the informal settlements around all of our big cities. And that's where, unfortunately, the resistance is being mounted. The service delivery protests are coming from there.
Yeah.
But the face of degradation and total marginalization is those informal settlements. And the trade union movement has not been able to find a connection with that working class. It is standing on its own. Saftu made a pledge that it will connect with those members of the working class. It will connect with the informalized working class, and it will create one movement out of those that are in secured big firms, big numbers, and those that are we are 2, 3, 10 years, and we have no union, we have no rights. We hear you celebrating May Day and talking about the beautiful history of struggles of workers. But sorry, we make no connection with all of that.
Yes.
We're not relating to that. Yeah.
And has Saftu made any strides with that pledge that you have committed to?
It's tough. It's tough. Look, it's tough. We have in 2018 July convened a working class summit, deliberately looking at the unemployed, the informalized, and the unions from the big workplaces. And 167 formations came. So we all agreed, let's do a common battle. Let's take forward a common battle which will connect these battles of the workplace, be they from big or small, with the struggles of the workers in the townships, in the informal settlements, and with the rural areas. We've made some strides, but not significant to the point that you can say there is now a norm that workers are conscientized that their struggles can only be won fully if they have this support
if they're unionized,
of the informal sector, and if these informal sector jobs are unionized, and that they themselves can battle with the informal settlements shoulder to shoulder. we're battling there. And unfortunately, all of these things, in my view, I can personally, I blame it to the current environment of the politics. A large number of these working class formations believe that they have been betrayed by the ANC, and that there is a need for an alternative. And that's where then the divisions will emerge. Others will say, here's our alternative. Others will say, no, we still have to have a proper discussion so that we do not repeat the same mistakes about the alternative and so forth and so forth. So those issues tend to unsettle some people who would have come to that working class summit genuinely wanting this unity between all of these three segments of the working class, and who will then be turned off by a discussion about an alternative to the ANC. That's not what they came here for. Others will say, no, the leadership is delaying us. We needed an alternative. Look at what is happening. Opportunists have now occupied the space. You are delaying us. We need an alternative. When is the date of a Labour Party being launched, a Workers' Party being launched? All of those things then tend to be small distractions to the agenda of uniting these three segments of a restructured working class. So you were asking, the question is, that's the source of demoralization. And that's why workers, even from the big firms, feel that they are being betrayed by the union and their leadership. Because the space have completely changed, and you must appreciate how different the space is from the pre-1994. Let's just look at these examples. I'm sorry, I don't want to ever personalize politics, but let's look at these few examples. Before 1994, President Cyril Ramaphosa was one of the most liked trade union leaders in South Africa, adored by everyone. He's now the president
of the country
and is driving what workers perceive to be anti-poor programs. The Minister of Minerals and Energy was one of those who succeeded him, and the Minister of Finance was the General Secretary of NUMSA. The Minister of Education, of Labour and Employment, became the General Secretary of the Teachers Union. And I can go on and on to list these giants of the labor movement who are now leading political figures. But that's not the end of the story. Loads of other very senior leaders of the movement became successful businessmen, multimillionaires, some suspected to be multi-billionaires. The shop stewards, militant shop stewards, became HR managers. And so when there is a divided table, one side is your well-experienced shop steward using all of the experience gained from the other side of the table to simply dribble the new shop stewards who doesn't have the same level of education and experience. So it's been so everybody says there's confusion. What are we fighting for? Are we fighting to lift these guys up? And then there's a moment of what you will call the transformation of 1994. The question that we're asking is, transformation, who benefited in the main from this transformation? Because even when we were in Cosatu, the first statement we made after 10 years of democracy was that in economic terms, the people who have benefited more from transformation, from democracy and freedom that was fought for by black working class is capital. So we're now concluding the third decade. I can challenge anybody who will say the main beneficiaries of economic transformation has not been capital, and at the expense of the working class. And I've told you how the working class have been restructured in South Africa. So that's what demoralizes workers. The transformation have meant that even though there's greater access to healthcare, and our mothers who are pregnant can go and get free healthcare, kids under age of 6 can get free healthcare, and that public hospitals remain the cheapest, far cheaper. You can't even compare. And but there is some developments that says, but these hospitals have become the mortuaries, and these hospitals don't have a Panado, and you get 10 back, and when you're supposed to get a treatment for your HIV and you develop resistance, because after traveling long kilometers in the rural areas and get told that we've run out of antiretrovirals, you have to battle to come back. Before, when you come back, you now have all manner of other resistance, and you die when you should have not died. So same like education, massive gains, big access, free education, schools, numbers growing, food provided, but still the fault lines remain. Very few schools have laboratories, libraries, no security. And I was listening to another teacher saying we are being raided now and again by the criminals who come and take the cell phones and
computers
and everything from the schools. And so when you look at the structure of education, you still see that transformation that is championed by one of the founding members of SATU, Comrade Angie Mutsaka, has meant that if you analyze the 2023 matric results, that when you look at the full 12-year span, 450,000 didn't arrive at matric. They left the schooling system, and they became securities, and they are tellers at the retail stores, and they are unlikely to go back. They are joining that. They become that 8.6 million of the young people.
That strata of workers you spoke about earlier.
No education, no employment, no training. And they've become part of that long 12 million people who are unemployed. So, but transformation have happened. When the majority of our kids cannot read with a meaning when they are on grade 4 and grade 5, when we can't compare with our peers on mathematics and science. So transformation seemed to be about celebrating matric results, big time. But the system of education is not making us to compete with Zimbabwe, Swaziland, and Botswana. And the transformers are leading it. The former liberation movement heroes are the ones who are leading it. This is what is creating a demoralization amongst workers and society as a whole.
I think that's quite a fair analysis. Let's chat about the Cosatu split. What impact do you think that had on the trade union landscape in the country?
Firstly, the split is created by what we are talking about.
Exactly.
Because others, mainly the public sector unions of Cosatu, are very happy. They have a sympathetic government, and who knows how important SATU and Nihau and Bob Crew and all of them are in their electoral fortunes. They want to keep them happy. Even though neoliberalism at this stage is setting them against each other, the austerity programs that were launched by Jacob Zuma after the 2008 and 2009 world economic crisis. But the source of that was the naturally manufacturing unions, more militant, sitting on the face of this restructuring that we were speaking about, of the protected, the underprotected, and the marginalized all together, begins to say, but guys, we're making no progress here. This digital democratic revolution is off the rails. And so we can keep this alliance. NUMSA leads this battle, and so the split happens. And unfortunately, where we are, irrespective of what could have been the reasons of that split, the trade union movement as a whole have become weak. Because of that split, despite of that split. And no one is able to say, for example, those that drove the dismissal of NUMSA and others, a host of people were dismissed before NUMSA itself was dismissed. Nobody is able to say in Cosatu, you see, we were right. There were voices like that of Fikile Majola, the General Secretary of Nihao, who said, let's surgically remove them. And thereafter we will build a Cosatu of our dream. Meaning that the Cosatu with NUMSA and myself and others present was not the ideal one, because in my view was not licking the boots enough of the ANC. So, but now you ask them, was that a good decision? All of them in their sleep, their conscience will tell them that no, that was a disaster decision we took. But let's face it, Saftu have not proven to be a new broom. Good statements on paper, battling to materialize all of these dreams. Divided itself by the very same issues that divided Cosatu, by the way. Neglect, investment company, the presence of the devil called the money. Weakening democracy, death of worker control, death of education, no training of shopkeepers and officials. All of those things are present in all of the trade unions, whether they are in FETUSA, NACTU, Saftu. And that's why we are pushing for the creation, at least, of a confederation between the four federations that are participating in NEDLEC. And luckily, in the labor school that took place early February, all of us agreed that there's a need for a confederation to coordinate the common programs, common interest, and one of those common interests is to fight against austerity programs that is driven by this government. So that's a glimpse of a hope in that if we were to really succeed to march together, and in Cape Town there was some elements of marching together against the budget speech of the minister. We need that. Only when workers see us emphasizing on their interest about retrenchments, job losses, living wage, social wage, will they begin to take us all seriously. But as long as we are about, let's vote for the ANC, let's vote for that party, but the real basic interest of workers comes second, then workers will continue to have no confidence in the trade unions. Currently, it's only 26% of workers who belong to trade unions. That figure will go 20%. In America, it went as low as 14%, 7% in the private sector. That's how bad things are. And I know that unions in America think that Joe Biden is the best thing that could have happened to them, because he's unmistakably pro-union, pro-trade union rights and worker rights and all of that. He believes in fairness, despite that we hate him for supporting the genocide of the people of Palestine, but it's good for the American workers. I've not checked whether these new rounds of mobilizing and recruitment campaigns have begun to at least lift the levels of workers believing in the trade unions again. The point that I was making is that if we are not careful, we will hit 20%, and then follow the syndrome.
And the numbers will continue to dwindle.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Of America, yeah. And that will be very sad because unfortunately, whilst that is happening, the levels of exploitation of workers is worse.
On the rise, yeah.
It's on the rise.
You, in your analysis, you present a myriad of challenges that have contributed to the demoralization of workers. I mean, particularly in Cosatu, that were prevalent in Cosatu prior to the split, that now find themselves materializing in federations outside of Cosatu. Will we ever see that unity amongst the working class prior to 1994? Will we ever see it in this post-democratic South Africa again, with all the challenges that are facing the sector?
Difficult. My hope is that by the time the next Congress of Saftu takes place, there's some semblance of a coordinated campaign of workers uniting all of the Confederation, fighting job losses, fighting against the collapsing of the state-owned enterprises, fighting privatization, and fighting against retrenchment, and fighting for a living wage together. That's what we need at the beginning. If we were to do those things properly and thoroughly, there will be no need to maintain Saftu, Cosatu, Fetusa, NACTO separate to one another. And more independent trade unions will find no reason to be outside a federation that is truly fighting for them, for the interest of the workers. This is very easy said than done.
Yeah.
Because in the pot, there's ego, there's leadership positions, there's loyalty to the logo,
interest in the
to
ruling
the history.
party.
There's an alliance, a big elephant in the room.
In the room, yes.
And you can see that Cosatu still believes, despite all of the evidence, that the ANC have totally dismally failed workers, at least where it matters the most, which is the midsection of the body, the stomach. Wages have been suppressed in South Africa since 1990. The gap between the rich and the poor have been widening.
Yeah.
The levels of unemployment have been increasing, levels of poverty, and the levels of corruption in the private and public sector has made us to compete with the worst rogue states in the world. Yes, there have been gains, and a lot of people say, oh yes, don't forget that we have more access to water, electricity, and education, healthcare. Important those things are. But those things are not more important to a worker than a job. The primary reason why a union must exist is for jobs. And when you get failed where it matters the most, in the front of jobs, there's no reason for you to maintain a political relationship at all. But then, comrades have different views, and we respect their views. Some of us held those views very strongly at some point. So we have to be tolerant.
Yeah.
But our hope is that, can we fight austerity together? The austerity of cutting budgets left, right, and center across all service delivery areas is biting workers, employed and unemployed. And why can't we fight that at least and see whether we cannot, in the process, find a reason to create a confederation and hopefully somewhere down the line realize the dream of one union, one industry, or at least coordinated, effective organizing of workers in a changing world, but one country, one federation.
before
all of us die.
Yeah. And I mean, over a number of years, ANC conference to ANC conference, members of the alliance usually raise what is called the reconfiguration of the alliance, where they believe that will solve the imminent challenges that they are facing. Do you think this reconfiguration can be materialized, or is it just another fairy tale?
It's a fairy tale. We left singing that song.
Yeah.
It never happened. Up to now, there's no reconfigured alliance. We have been innovative, calling for different kinds of an alliance. We need a political alliance, a political center. The SACP have now conceptualized this reconfiguration. All of it, you know what is it on the bottom line? Can we drive the transformation together as equal partners, even though the ANC is a leader of the alliance? But can we have a sense that we all have
an input,
some tips,
contribution to the steering wheel, yes,
in terms of where it is turning to. The steering wheel, one person only, or 2, 3, 10 of them who were very powerful in the ANC, drove it to the right, and introduced privatization as the theme, as the main program of the ANC. 1995 to fully blown neoliberalism based on reducing the role of the state in the economy, and which led to 1 million jobs lost between 1996 and 1999, forcing Cosatu under our leadership then, for the first time, to embark on an openly political strike. We went on a strike on the 10th of May in 1999 to protest. So, have this reconfiguration ever happened? It's not there even now. They are now again crying. We hear. They are afraid to cry louder because there is now MK, there's EFF, who will say, we told you.
Yeah.
They are crying, hey, not enough of us are in this list going to parliament. And unfortunately, it seems that too many of them have transformed the Federation of Workers into an instrument and a vehicle to climb into that gravy train in parliament.
Yeah.
And that's why there's so much neglect, because instead of people taking up militant struggles against austerity, they don't want to rock the boat because they still want to be looked at sympathetically in the list process. And that's the fundamental, that's what I call that the massive elephant in the room. That makes it very difficult to coordinate real solidarity amongst workers. But look, there are signs that workers are now beginning to be tired of being promised a reconfigured alliance when they are in the backseat of this coach driven by the liberal former trade unions. I was in the Cosatu Congress, historically never been there until last year. There was a war there. There were workers openly rioting and revolting against the chairperson of the ANC, their former idol, Dalai Lama, Gwede. And Nihau led that very interestingly. And other unions very, very keen to say, let's review this alliance. But it took the most beneficiary of the transformation to resist that, the teachers' union. And when you analyze this transformation and look at who have really benefited in this dysfunctional education system, it's the Saftu activist, the very minister of basic education. At some point, almost every director general And at some point, every MEC, at some point, every head of a district, every principal, every deputy principal, HOD, were SATU leaders. So they have a stake.
Yeah.
And this is what I'm saying, the contradiction between a transformation that produced worse results for the working class. I spoke to you about the state of the public education, but these results are produced by the cadre, the leader, the transformer in inverted commas. And all of those things play a role in the disunity of the trade unions in our country. We live in a hope that at some point a new generation of workers will arise to say this alliance has not worked. This call for a reconfiguration center has been made since 1995, when the ANC started to develop and drive anti-worker programs. Nothing have come out of it. The alliance works only during elections time.
Yeah.
After the elections, everybody knows his place. The ANC governs.